Hello, and welcome to Buffy B's YouTube channel. Today we're going to be talking about basic employee relations for the federal government sector. I have worked in employee relations for the federal government at 4 different federal agencies, and I have over 20 years experience in this field. So for anyone new or just wants a quick refresher course on employee relations, this is for you. So let's go ahead and get started. Training objectives. We're going to have an overview of standards of conduct, the difference between disciplinary and adverse actions. We're also going to talk about grievance procedures. We're going to talk about supervisors' roles and responsibilities, employee relations staff, what their roles are and responsibilities are as well. So let's go ahead and get started. Roles and responsibilities. All employees, regardless of the federal agency, you are expected to give a full day's work for a full day's pay. If there's anything going on with problems with work, or you need to take time off, you need to let your supervisor know of this. If you need any help with anything, ask for guidance from your supervisor. And again, request and receive approval for leave. You can't just say I'm out or I don't want to come to work without giving notice. Supervisors, they are to assign work and approve leave. They are to evaluate employee performance and take appropriate disciplinary action when required. Documentation. Every supervisor should have an employee folder, a folder for each of their subordinate employees. This is maintained by the first level supervisor, and it must be protected from unauthorized access. Some of the things you would have in there include emergency contact information for each employee, any comments or observations on the employee, such as feedback from coworkers, feedback from not just coworkers in their department, but other departments, feedback that you have received from outside customers as well, employee and position information, and medical info. Now, any kind of medical information, such as reasonable accommodation or a doctor's note excusing an absence, must be kept in a sealed envelope. And you can put this in the employee folder, but it has to be separate, again, in a sealed envelope. And all of this information must be kept confidential so that no one else can get access to it. So I highly recommend you keep this in a locked file cabinet. Communication is the key in employee relations. Supervisors want to set clear performance expectations for each employee. They want to meet with the employees frequently. Tell them they're doing a good job. Tell them they're not doing such a good job. And when you're given that critique, that critical observation and notice to the employee, tell them what they can do to improve. And be honest and straightforward with the employee. I had one supervisor of mine gave me the phrase, and I use it to this day. Have a come to Jesus talk with your employees when you need to. When there's any conduct or performance issues, you want to talk that over with the employee right away. Do not wait. And you want to document your discussions. It's okay to call your employee in and have a one-on-one discussion with them, but afterwards, send an email to the employee and say, hey, this is what we discussed. This is a summary of what we discussed. If there's something you don't understand or if I summarize something wrong, please let me know. By doing that, you are giving or putting the onus, the burden on the employee to say, well, I didn't understand this, or can you explain this a little bit more, or, whatever. And if they don't, that gives you, the supervisor or manager, pretty good evidence that they understood what you talked about, and from here on out, there's any issues, they should be resolved. And if not, then you will take the next step forward and take disciplinary action if so need be, if so required. And also coordinate with your employee relations, labor relations specialist. That's what the ERLR stands for. Your ERLR specialist in HR is there to help you. And if you have any questions, you need to consult with them at the beginning rather than at the end of any kind of conduct or performance issues. They will guide you where you need to go. Make sure you're following the rules and regulations, not only for your agency, but that are set from OPM, Office of Personnel Management. Conduct. All employees are supposed to observe all rules of conduct. They are to avoid misconduct. They are to be courteous, considerate, proper use of government issued property. You're not supposed to, when you're using a government vehicle and you're going for training or you're going to a different facility, oh, I know I'm supposed to only go 10 miles for this facility, but I'm going to make a detour and I'm going to drive to Vegas or something. That's over 1,000 miles away. You can't do that. And also, some employees can be disciplined for conduct off the job. And the way that's done is if there's a nexus between the conduct and the job. For example, if an employee is in uniform and it clearly identifies, okay, they're in uniform, that looks like so-and-so agency's uniform, I think they're an employee of that agency. And if they're doing some misconduct, getting loud and rowdy after drinking and they get arrested for the drunken disorderly conduct, they can be held accountable for that at work as well. Conduct continued. Supervisors, you need to become familiar with the regulations. We in employee relations don't expect you to know every single regulation, but know the most common ones out there, such as for leave, such as for you need to follow the rules as far as ethics. And you're also responsible as a supervisor for investigating any kind of misconduct. And you take appropriate corrective action when necessary. Basically, you're responsible for holding your employees accountable for their misconduct. Because if you do not, the other employees will see that and always use this comparison. If you have one bad apple and you don't address it, that bad apple is going to start ruining the rest of the apples in that bunch. So if you have an employee that's engaging in misconduct and you don't address it, the other employees will see that and they'll be like, well, so-and-so's acting, wild and crazy. I'm going to do the same thing. Or they're not doing their work. I'm not going to do my work either. So instead of having one problem employee, now you have your whole staff or the majority of your staff are problem employees, and or your star employee who comes to work on time, does a great job always. They're going to start looking for another job because they see what's going on. They don't like it. They don't like doing their work plus the work of 2 or 3 others. So they will leave. Notice, this is something I came up with on my own, and in my opinion, this is the crux of employee relations, labor relations. Again, my experiences with the federal government sector. Notice, or N, stands for notice. You basically want to put your employee on notice of what is expected of him or her, not only regarding leave, but their conduct. And sometimes we can argue that an employee knew or should have known, for example, in regards to misconduct. An employee should know, or we can argue should have known, they are not to hit another employee. They are not to curse at a customer or at another employee. That's something we can argue knew or should have known. Next is O, or opportunity. Give your employees a chance to abide by the rules and regulations. Once you've told them what they are, give them the chance to act accordingly. T, tell them when you've observed or been told that, they were cursing at a customer, weren't coming to work on time, was not documenting that they were late, and let them know, hey, this is what you did, this is what you need to do to correct it so you can avoid doing so in the future. Because if this continues, I will take appropriate action. And then that follows into the I, inform. Tell them the consequences for future violations. Again, if this continues, I will take appropriate disciplinary action up to and including your removal from federal service. So let's say they don't believe you or they don't get the message and they engage in misconduct again. This is when you cite them for that future violation. This is the C. Basically, you're going to start writing them up. And then if they continue this, and you're going through progressive discipline, which we'll talk on a little bit later, you evict them, which is remove them. You terminate them from federal government employment. Again, in my opinion, that is federal employee relations summed up in one word, and each word defined and lets you know this is your roadmap for employee relations. Misconduct. That's when an employee chooses not to perform the job. that they were hired to do. The most common ones I've seen, leave issues. That's number one, attendance. Employees don't want to come to work. They don't call and request leave. They have a lot of AWOL, absent without leave, and permission. Another, insubordination or failure to follow instructions. Now, I know insubordination sounds so dirty, so gritty, so that's what you want to charge your employee with when you're writing them up. Do not use insubordination. Again, I'm going to repeat that. Do not charge your employee with insubordination. You charge them with failure to follow instructions, and this is why. If you charge your employee with insubordination, you have to prove intent, meaning that employee intended not to follow your instruction. How do you prove intent? That's something that's difficult to prove. We leave that for the prosecutors in criminal cases. We don't do that in employee relations and federal government. Make it easy on yourself. Charge them with failure to follow instructions. You have to prove you gave an instruction and the employee didn't do it. That's failure to follow. And you don't have to prove intent. So that's why we don't charge with insubordination. We charge with failure to follow instructions. Lack of candor. A nicer way of saying lying, but again, we don't charge it with lying. We charge lack of candor or misrepresentation because why? We do not have to prove intent. And then misuse of government time or equipment. We talked earlier about, driving a car to Vegas, or you have a laptop and you're using it for your side business instead of just for government work. The copy machine. You have a church bazaar sale and you go in there and you run 1,000 photocopies off of the flyer you're going to hang all around the city. Misuse of government equipment. Now we're going to talk about progressive discipline. Oral counseling. It's okay to call your employee in there and have a discussion with him or her and say, hey, this is what I've observed. This is what's been reported to me. Let them know the rule and regulation that they're violating. Let them know how they can correct the behavior. Give them a copy of the rule and regulation. And then follow that oral discussion up with an email. Again, you're going to ask that employee, you're going to tell them, this is what we talked about. Do you have any questions or concerns? Please let me know. If they don't tell you that, then there's your proof that, hey, they understood it. Now hold them accountable to what you discussed. And then, because you have that email, that's your written proof that you did have a discussion with that employee about those issues. So if it arises again, the employee cannot say, hey, supervisor didn't tell me that I was doing this wrong as far as my performance, or I didn't know I was, disobeying a rule. Yes, you did know, because here's the email covering the discussion we had. Letter of warning. In some agencies, this is still informal discipline, whereas in others, it's formal. And the difference is informal is usually only going to last like 6 months, like the oral counseling reduced down to an email, or when this letter of warning is considered informal, it's going to last 6 months. Okay, and again, letter of warning, letter of counseling, warning and counseling, those words are interchangeable. And again, these are good for 6 months. And whenever you're doing the oral counseling and you send the email, and in any kind of written document, you always put in there something to the verbiage that if you continue to engage in misconduct of any kind, you could face further disciplinary action up to and including your removal from federal government. That way the employee will never be able to say, well, I didn't know that I could be removed if I continued misbehaving. Yes, you did. It was in every single letter, email, etc. that you received. Then admonishment. In some federal agencies, that's the lowest form of formal disciplinary action. And these usually last for 1 year. And the thing about how long these actions last is if within that time that these actions are live, letter of warning or counseling 6 months, admonishment a year, if that employee engages in additional misconduct, same kind of misconduct or something different, let's say the first time you wrote them up, they were late, continually late. The next time they actually cursed at a customer. So one time you have attendance related misconduct, now you have just misconduct on its own. They will build on each other if that first item is still live. Again, letter of warning or counseling is good for 6 months. An admonishment is live for a year. So let's say whatever you wrote before is still live and the employee engages in another type of misconduct. Again, it can be same misconduct as before, or something totally different. You build on it and you can go with a reprimand. These are usually good for 2 years, and they're formal, disciplinary action, and they're good for 2 years. And the admonishments and reprimands will actually go into the employee's electronic OPF. That's their personnel file. A suspension. Again, if you're doing progressive discipline and the prior action and reprimand is still live or an admonishment, you can go with a suspension. Suspension can be paid time off. It can be paid time while they're working, or it will be time off and they're not paid, but it's still a suspension. Admonishments and reprimands, once they have expired, they're no longer live, they are pulled from the EOPF. Suspensions and anything higher stay in the EOPF forever, unless there's some kind of grievance and there's an agreement, a settlement agreement to pull it. Otherwise, it stays in there forever. So when an employee applies for a position elsewhere and the gaining agency looks into that EOPF, they'll see that so-and-so was suspended, or they were demoted, or they were previously removed. So those come with a stiffer penalty. Next up is demotion or removal, and that's just what they are. You're demoted from, say, for example, a supervisor down to just a non-supervisory position, or from a higher grade to a lower grade, which is affecting your money. And removal is you're terminated, you're fired. And again, they'll stay in the EOPF forever unless there's a settlement agreement to remove them. Now, sometimes you won't follow progressive discipline. Let's say, for example, you have an employee and they engage in something, we use the word egregious, just a fancy word for saying serious. This can be a 30-year employee, perfect attendance, perfect employee, never had a problem with them, never been written up, never even had an oral counseling against them. But one day they come in there and let's say they shoot somebody or they hit somebody. That you're not going to go with progressive discipline and do an oral counseling or a letter of warning. You're probably going to go with removal on that. If it's serious enough, and let's face it, hitting somebody and definitely shooting somebody can be grounds for removal. Okay. Now, you're going to take some corrective action. Counseling or process discussion. Excuse me. Again, that's to ensure the employee is aware of his or her responsibilities. This is only between the supervisor and employee. There should not be an audience. Documented in the employee folder. That's with that email. And it's non-disciplinary. You're going to talk about your expectations. You're going to provide guidance, instructions, recommendations, anything to help that employee be the best employee that they can be. And we're just going to go over a little summary of what we've already discussed because I want to really get this hammered in so you understand what's going on as far as employee relations in the federal sector. We're going to continue talking about corrective actions. Basically, you're going to take a corrective action when the situation warrants that. There's been repeated incidents, repeated occurrences of misconduct or leave issues, and the prior counselings, the prior discussions haven't gotten through to the employee. They're still engaging in the misconduct. And so by the time you actually put something in writing, they should have a reasonable expectation that they're going to get written up because you've been talking to them. They weren't listening. So now you're going to take the next step, which is something in writing. Again, we're going to be going over a little summary of what we've already discussed. I want to make sure you understand your options. A warning can be a verbal counseling or written counseling documented in the employee folder. Again, if you do that verbal counseling, follow with an email summarizing what you talked about, ask the employee if they have any questions or concerns, and then let them know anything coming forward with some more misconduct or leave issues, whatever, you can face further disciplinary action up to and including your removal from federal service. Put it in that employee folder that you have on that employee as well. Usually not disciplinary, but used to support a future disciplinary action. Again, these are considered live for about 6 months. Now, let's talk about disciplinary or adverse actions, the difference, and how to proceed with them. You must have supporting documentation, witness statements, there's written complaints, prior counselings, those emails that you sent following that verbal discussion. There's also photos, videos, text. I know a lot of agencies are using Microsoft Teams. You can do a printout of the Teams discussion. Anything basically that proves the allegation of what you have against that employee. If they're engaging in leave abuse, they're not calling in, they're being marked AWOL, get their time and attendance sheets. That's going to prove that. You also want to look at the appropriateness of the penalty. You want to consider the Douglas factors. There was a famous case from the VA in 1981, and 12 different Douglas factors were developed, and you must consider these actions when you're taking disciplinary action. Some of them include how severe the misconduct is, any kind of notoriety. Again, that example I gave earlier, they're in uniform and they get arrested for drunken and disorderly conduct. The public saw that, and that tarnishes the opinion possibly of that agency, because people in the public saw that employee get arrested and they're in uniform of that agency. Prior disciplinary action, you look at the table of penalties. Every agency has a table of penalties that is a guide for their supervisors and managers to use when taking action. You think about prior incidents with other employees. How did you handle those? Did you do the same level of disciplinary action? You're going to take into consideration that, and then so on. Now, disciplinary and adverse action should be constructive and progressive whenever possible, meaning take the least severe level that you believe will correct the employee's behavior. And that's where your employee relations specialist will come to you, the supervisor or manager, and ask you, well, you work with your employee every day. You know what can you're in a better position to know what message, what level of disciplinary action will get the message across to the employee to correct their behavior. Management, you will propose and decide the actions. Employee relations will only advise you. We do not tell you what to do. We give you your options and you make the decision. So please don't ever go before an arbitrator or a judge and you're asked, well, why did you make this decision to propose removal or to suspend the employee? And then please don't ever say, because HR told me. No, HR will never tell you what to do. We will give you your options and then you decide what to do. Now, disciplinary actions. We're going to go into more detail. Again, just a quick review. I know this is, I'm saying the same thing over and over, but I want to get this through to you so you understand. Letter of warning or an admonishment or a reprimand, and again, it depends on your agency, federal agency, is usually the least severe form of formal disciplinary action. Some agencies, a letter of warning is informal, though. It's in writing. It's usually filed for 2 years in the EOPF. That's for the reprimand. Admonishment is about a year. Letter of warning, 6 months. It's live. Suspensions. They are permanently in the EOPF unless there's a settlement agreement to remove it. An SF-50, notice of action, is prepared on it. The employee can be in a non-paid status or they can be in a paid status. Paid status or non-paid status, suspension is a suspension is a suspension. And the suspension days may include days of the week outside their tour of duty. So let's say an employee is suspended for 14 calendar days and they work Monday through Friday. You can go ahead and suspend them for 14 calendar days in a row, including the weekends, and it can be a consecutive period of time, even though they don't work on the weekend. Adverse actions. Any kind of suspension, 15 days or longer, is considered adverse. A demotion, again, is considered adverse. A removal, adverse. These all become permanent part of the record and documented in the EOPF, again, unless there's a settlement agreement. And this is the big difference between disciplinary actions and adverse actions. Adverse actions may be appealable to the Merit Systems Protection Board, often called MSPB or just the board. But you have to be suspended for at least 15 days or longer, be demoted or removed before you can appeal to the Merit System Protection Board. Now, there's other cases where you can appeal, but these are the most common ones that are often appealed to the MSPB. Performance management. Employee performance appraisals, EPAPs, and supervisory performance appraisals, SPAPs. Some agencies make an IDP, an individual development plan, mandatory for supervisors. Some of them make it mandatory for all employees. And that's just a plan to say, okay, this is what you want to do this following year as far as your career. You want to take these courses, you want to attend this training, maybe you want to go on a detail in another department and learn something else. And then what do you want to do long term in 5 years or 10 years? The performance plan is established by the first line supervisor, and it should be done within the first 60 days of the new rating period. Excuse me. In most agencies, federal agencies, a rating period starts October 1st of the year, and it runs until September 30th of the following year. And again, a new employee should be put on a new plan, performance plan, within their first 60 days and by their first line supervisor. There's that period I told you about, October 1st to September 30th. The minimum amount of time to be on an appraisal and then to get rated is 90 days or 3 months. And most agencies will require at least one mandatory mid-year progress review. And I should note that these plans should be in writing. Okay, now, a lot of supervisors, especially new ones, will ask, well, how do I know an employee is a performance issue versus a conduct issue? Okay, when it's a true performance problem, that employee really wants to do a good job at their work, but they can't catch on. They don't understand the training. They don't understand the system that it's on. For whatever reason, they just can't get a hang of the job duties. So what do? You coach and you mentor the employee. Give them the training they need. Give them the retraining they need. Always ask that employee, okay, what else do you need? What can I do to help you be successful? Let them know what's working and what's not working. Help them correct it. I cannot stress this one. Utilize that probationary period if it applies. I had one supervisor, or actually a manager, tell me a long time ago, and these words ring so true. A probationary employee, if they're not working out, we need to terminate them during that probationary period. Because if we don't, and they're brand new to the federal government may be stuck with someone that's not well suited for their job for the federal government for 30 plus years. Another option, help the employee find another position that you think is more suitable to their skill set. There's always a performance improvement plan in some agencies called a PIP. But above all else, look at the sentence in red font. Do not surprise your employee relations specialist or that employee with an unsuccessful or minimally successful rating, meaning you rate them that way at the end of the rating period. You've never had a discussion with them. You've never talked to employee relations. So do you really think that's going to hold up upon review? No, it's not. You got to have some proof. You got to have documentation that you've been putting that employee on notice of their performance issues. Without that, you can't rate them minimally successful or unsuccessful because you can't prove you've been talking to the employee. Performance-based actions. Take them immediately when the employee is failing in one or more critical element. Don't wait till the end of the rating cycle. And again, you need documented proof of your discussions on their performance issues. Performance improvement period, or the PIP. Whenever an employee has been rated unsuccessful in a critical element, you need to put them on a PIP if your agency allows PIPs. Some agencies don't. So a PIP, the employee is given a formal opportunity period to improve. The bare minimum, some agencies will say 30 days. I would stress to try at least 60. And you spell it out in writing. This is what you're failing, employee. This is what you need to do to bring yourself back up to at least minimally successful. And I know that may be shocking for people outside of the federal government, but if an employee is rated minimally successful, they keep their job. They only face fear of losing their job for performance if they are unsuccessful. Employee appeals. There's grievances. There's administrative grievance procedures. And then their bargaining unit employees will go through whatever their collective bargaining agreement states. We talked about the MSPB. There's always the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, or EEOC for short, and Office of Special Counsel. That's for basically whistleblower. So an employee believes there's something going on, such as waste or fraud, they can report that to OSC. And if they believe that there's retaliation because of them being a whistleblower, they'll go to OSC again. Grievance procedures. Administrative grievance systems is usually a two-step process, and this is for supervisory employees who are in management, basically those not covered by a collective bargaining agreement, and we call it a CBA for short. Administrative grievance procedures. Step 1 is usually in writing and is usually filed within 15 days of the challenged action. Say the employee was written up, they received a reprimand, a suspension. They have 15 calendar days to file for an administrative grievance. And usually it's about 10 to 14 days, depending on the agency, when they need to receive a written reply, or if they're going to invoke alternative dispute resolution. They will have 45 days to complete the ADR process. Administrative grievance continued. Step 2 is usually considered the formal stage. It's in writing. And usually once the employee receives a decision from step 1 and they don't agree with it, they'll have about 7 calendar days to appeal to step 2. At this stage, ADR is at management's discretion usually, and the response from management is due back to the employee within 20 calendar days. Again, consult with your HR, your employee relations, and they'll give you the exact timelines. But these are typical of the ones that I've experienced in the 4 different agencies I've worked at. Now, whatever this decision is for or against the employee, there's no further appeals. Negotiated grievance procedure. This is dealing with the collective bargaining agreement with any of your bargaining unit employees, AFGE or NAGE or any of those. Please, 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 I cannot stress it enough. Work with your local employee relations, labor relations specialist. They will review the applicable CBA rules and regulations with you and give you guidance on the grievance procedure. Each CBA is different. There's some similar language, but some of the dates may be different, the steps may be different, so it's very critical to consult with your ERLR specialist for guidance. But some things that are typical is usually 3 steps with an optional 4th step. So a grievance step 1, step 2, step 3, and sometimes a step 4. There's time requirements at each step. The employee has so many days to appeal at the first step, and then at the second, and the third, and if there's a 4th step. And on the flip side, management has so many days to provide a response. If management does not provide a response, the employee can go ahead and appeal to the next step. Whereas if the employee doesn't like the decision and they fail to meet the timeline that is given to go to the next step, they can still file it, but then management should start arguing that the appeal's untimely. And you've got to put that in the records. You got to put it in writing. I'm going to hear your step 2, 3, or 4, but it's untimely. It was due on X date. You didn't file till Y date. And there are penalties for noncompliance. And again, you want to read that labor management agreement, that CBA, for details, and you want to work closely with your ERLR specialist. Arbitration procedure. If the grievance goes through all 3 or sometimes 4 steps and is still unresolved, the union can invoke binding arbitration. And usually the arbitrator's award is final with limited exceptions. And those limited exceptions is if the award is contrary to law, rule, or regulation, so then it goes into the federal court system. Be asking, how can your ERLR specialist help you? Well, they're there to provide advice and assistance, guidance on how to work with your employee to correct behavior, correct performance. Um, they know the rules and regulations, or if they don't, they know where to look them up. Again, no supervisor, no manager is required to know every single rule or regulation. And you know, your ERLR specialists aren't supposed to know them all either, but they are supposed to be able to find the information they need, the resources to look to find the answers. If you're dealing with medical issues, reasonable accommodation, or you know, the employee is going to be out, and they need advanced sick leave. If you're dealing with grievances, your ERLR specialist will walk you through the process for the administrative, again for the negotiated grievance process. And then employee assistance program. ERLR can give you information on the website for your agency and or the telephone number for your employee assistance program. That is a really good resource for all employees of the federal government. And I make it a practice, and I know a lot of other ERLR specialists make it a practice. Whenever they write anything for the supervisors or managers, they will put information in there for the EAP program, the point of contact, the website, the name of the EAP provider, as well as a telephone number. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope you found this video helpful. If you have any questions, any generic questions that I might be able to help you, again, I have over 20 years experience in ERLR. I'll be more than happy to help you. Sorry about that. The best I can. I'm not going to give you any advice. I'm not going to tell you, you know, as an ERLR specialist, this is what you can do, because more than likely you don't work for the agency that I work for, and or you're not in my local facility. So I can't do that, but I can give you some questions, some possible direction that you need to go to into your ERLR specialist that does provide service to you and help you figure out a pathway to resolve the issue you're facing. So if you found this video helpful, if you liked it, please click the like button. Please add a comment, again, any comments or questions, and share the video. Also, please consider subscribing to this channel and hitting the notification button so you'll be notified when I add more videos on employee relation topics, which will be within the federal government sector. Thank you again for watching. Bye.